Hey everybody, welcome back to Podcasts and Players. On this week's episode, I make it sound like this is weekly. On this episode, whenever it comes out, we've got a new guest with kind of a new sort of background from other guests that we've had. This person has been working on their own RPG system. That's not even D&D, can you believe it? And I've actually played it before, and it's been really great. He also runs a podcast called The Batarians on YouTube, and you can find him on Twitter as well. Give it up for Joe.
Yeah.
Just Joe. No last name, just Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe. Joe, no last name. It's a mononym.
Nice. So thanks for coming on. Today I kind of wanted to pick your brain about, Animite Tales, your new game system that you've been working on, because it's actually been a while since we've chatted, and it's been a while since that I've learned what updates have happened for it. So I kind of want to pick your brain about that. But before we get to that, I want to ask some questions about you, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on here. To be honest, when you invited me, I was like, I get to be on a podcast that I didn't have to make.
First of all, that's how we met. You were the co-host of a different podcast, and I got interviewed by you. Yeah, how does it feel to be in the hot seat, huh, buddy? The tables have turned.
I gotta be honest, without Des balancing it out, I'm a lot more nervous now.
Oh, you better be, man, because I'm about to put you over the coals right here and rake you over the coals. That's how they say it. Anyway. It's really not going to be that bad. I just kind of want to ask, I know that you've obviously got an interest in RPGs, otherwise you wouldn't be making a system for it. So my question is, what led you to making your own RPG system? Were you dissatisfied with existing ones, or?
You know what? I think any answer that I'm gonna give is gonna annoy someone, so I'll just tell the little story, the little anecdote here. I actually was making Animite Tales. I've been making Animite Tales ever since 2017, when I was in university in Cambridge. I was in Anglia Ruskin. It was an okay university, but to be honest, it was just not.
Well, it sounds good because it's in Cambridge, and everyone hears that, and they're like, "Ooh."
Yeah. So you know what? That's what I say. I always say to people, you know what? I just went to university in Cambridge, but people barely ever ask me, "Oh, what university was it?" Because everyone just assumes that one. Hey, that's not my fault. That's your fault. But no, I was in university for about 3 years, and basically in my final year, I made a game along with a bunch of other friends. And instead of making a video game, because I was doing video games development at the time, I was like, I just want to do something on the side. And I went, there's these people who do this D&D. I wonder if that's easy to do. And I was just like, yeah, I guess I'll just make it kind of like an add-on for Dungeons and Dragons. And then I started making it. I was like, yeah, these mechanics don't really fit in the same way, and ultimately I think it would just be, it's kind of like homebrew would just be so broken, because you're playing as a spellcaster and you have a limited amount of spells, whereas in Animite Tales, if you have a superpower or a special ability and you can just keep using it because it's your ability, it kind of becomes that thing where it's there's no limitation compared to this guy. He has weaknesses, but he can keep using it, and he's way too powerful. So we eventually just made the entire thing our own thing, and it took about 6 months of playtesting to realize that I actually wanted to make this a proper bigger thing. And ever since then, it's been kicking off. So yeah, it wasn't actually a dissatisfaction with any tabletop RPGs. And again, this will surprise some people. When I first ever started making this, I watched one video on D&D, and it was, funnily enough, it was at the time Team 4 Stars at the table.
Oh.
And about a month later, I went back to see my brother, and at the time, he was watching Puff and Forest videos, and I got really into Puff and Forest videos. And I speak to him every now and again, thanks to Des, which is another story that I'll go to at another time. But thanks to Des, I was able to get in contact, and we were able to do a couple of podcasts with him. But I absolutely had no idea about anything to do with D&D. I now know some stuff.
Right. You've been around the block now, but
yeah, I've played it a couple
and by
times
the way,
now.
for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, Des is our mutual friend who runs the 12D20 podcast. She's a wonderful person. She even did a voice in my third like Pathfinder story with Fizzle the Blue Goblin. If anyone's listening to this podcast who hasn't seen that video on my channel, like, you should do yourself a favor and go see it, because I think it's one of my better videos that I've released. But she's a voice in that.
There's just some really good voices, to be fair. She's wacky and funny and creative like that.
she's an amazing person. And she also kind of got me into the idea of podcasts. I kind of have her to thank for the idea of, podcasts and players. I was like, you know what, this is a really fun concept to just like talk to people about games. Like, I mean, that's what we want to do anyway. We're nerds. Let's just do it and then record it, and other people can listen.
Well, I'll have to remember to thank her for that as well, because I've always got more podcasts to listen to. After every time that she's spoken to someone that she podcasted, they then did something podcast worthy, and again, now I've had more content to watch on YouTube.
Nice. It's like just what I need. Add it to the pile. All right, let's jump into your game a little bit, because you already kind of mentioned it a bit, and even though I played like a short shot, I guess, like a one-shot adventure, which, by the way, anyone listening, I will have a link to this adventure. We recorded it. We actually recorded us playing this like villain heist using the then Animite Tales system. I'm sure it's changed a little bit since then. But yeah, we played it, and it was myself. It was Coming Soon Entertainment, Item Pouch, and I think your friend. I don't remember.
My little brother, actually. He helps me a lot of the development as well, and he was playing Podio, the time manipulating.
Yes, that's right. He was the only other guy that like got out of there.
Yeah, you were the one who got out as well. Yeah, I remember that.
Well, so that's the thing I want to get to. So first of all, the premise of the game, from what I'm going to just give you what I remember, and then I want you just fill in the blanks or correct me afterwards. You tell me, like, you set me straight on this.
Yeah.
But this is what I remember the premise of the game being. It is a world of superheroes and supervillains. So already I'm hooked, because I played City of Heroes and City of Villains back in like 2005. That was my MMO. I never really got into WoW or anything. I liked the superhero scene. And what I really liked about that game was that you had a primary power set, and as you leveled up, you unlocked more like abilities that are in that power set. So like, let's say you had fire powers. Well, maybe the first thing you could do is just shoot like a firebolt at somebody, right? Like, so that's the only thing at first. But as you get better at it, that expands to more abilities that deal with fire, more interesting, creative ways to use it. But you don't just suddenly get like a different power, like super strength or something. Like, it's all the same, but you just have to get like more creative with it, which was something I really liked. So everybody in that MMO had like a unique thing they could do, because everyone chose their own power sets. And I got that feeling when I played Animite Tales. Like, from what I understand, there are different like races. For example, you got humans. Normally humans don't have a power set like that's like supernatural. They might have to rely on technology or martial arts or something, something like Batman would have to do. And then you've got people who might have been genetically altered, so they might have access to like one power set, right? However, the Animite of this world is what allows people to have superpowers. So like, the more power sets you have access to, the weaker you are to Animite, as if it's like a kryptonite, like it does more damage, which I think was very balanced. So what I ended up playing, and this was rolled randomly, was a demon husk. And this was, again, like a villain heist one-shot that we played. So I got to be a bad guy. So I played this demon husk I named Monstralisk, who's based off of my City of Villains character. Let's just get that out of the way. That was, yeah. There was a bit of a one-on-one there, but
that's where he was from.
yeah. However, he was way funner to play in your game, because I rolled randomly for his powers, and he just so happened to get some of the most like insanely good powers. First, there's super strength, which I think a lot of our characters ended up having super strength just by coincidence. We all like,
yes.
yeah. So that was cool. But then he also had enlarge, which is like to just grow. And when you combine super strength and enlarge, it gets broken. At least that's not like a dig at you. Like I think that was a good play test for you guys to kind of see the effects of this.
I want to point out we have not changed that at all for the reason, but I will go into that later about that. But
we'll dive into the mechanics a little bit for sure. But so I had this ability to grow, I think like 13 meters. Like I could be enormous, like 4 stories or something. And that and super strength, and then my third power, because demon husks, along with like undead husks or whatever, like they get 3 sets. So my third set was a defensive power, again rolled randomly, that makes me immune to animite damage for a number of rounds. The only weakness I have, I can just activate this power and be immune to. And if I move fast enough, if I kick the enemy's ass and it like quickly enough, I won't have to deal with animite at all.
Yeah, I think it might be a surprise to say that was the only power that didn't make the cut.
That was the only thing I didn't really need. I ended up using it at the end when I think I fought this hero named Energon, but he didn't use animite. He used energy or something, right? So,
yes.
But yeah, I mean, I'm already kind of gushing over because of how fun it was. And anyone who's interested, you absolutely should just put that on in the background and just listen to it because it's so much fun.
It's chaotic. It is quite an interesting scene, and for once you're playing as characters who don't have the excuse as to why they're doing morally questionable things, because you were all bad guys and you had to do a particular thing. It was a heist on a bank, which seems like it would be done within a few minutes with these characters. Watch it, listen to it.
Yeah, well, it actually, I think it probably didn't even take that long in game. It's just that, every round we have to kind of calculate what we're doing and everything. There's a lot of rolls being made, but
that and something happened sort of on the final third that just...
Oh, yeah. There was a turning point that involved a grenade and a locked vault door. And I won't go into any more details, but that was an immensely fun one shot. And I remember one of the things that I said was that like this really lends itself to one shots because the reveal of the powers, the surprise of showing people what you can do, is really satisfying. Like none of our characters knew each other, but we all had these powers that we got to reveal, and like that reveal is just super. I don't know. It's satisfying because like it plays out like you'd imagine like a superhero television show would play out, like where you go up against a villain or something and you think you know what they can do, but then they have this like trump card, this ace up their sleeve that, oh, but I can do this, that's just really fun. Anyway, that's my impressions of it. So please tell me what have I missed and give us a fuller picture of the world of Animite Tales.
Well, first of all, you hit every nail on the head, absolutely. Yes, the original draft did actually state that there were many races, and there still are many races. Humans, superhumans, what are called anomalies, who have 2 powers. They have 2 times the amount of animite damage, and obviously, if both powers have weaknesses, they have both those weaknesses. However, husks are like the mutated variants. Like this radiation that comes off of the animite itself is actually something that alters reality, and because of that, it alters the DNA to the point of which they become these really powerful things. Because of that, they do take multiple times more animite damage, but they do have their own sets of powers. The only thing that has changed since then at all is that we've named them differently, because originally we wanted them to be called demons and wraiths because they looked kind of like demons and wraiths, but we've changed them to now like having their own names. Like for instance, I think what you had a berserker husk, which they'll now just be called berserkers, and they're a type of husk. There were archdemons, which are now just called archlings, and shadows and stalkers are their own particular names from under the wraiths. But for your abilities, the only thing that is actually changed in that one is it was originally called Animite Aura Skin, which was an ability that you could activate temporarily to generate this weird aura that would literally make you invulnerable to the one thing that you were weak to, which was animite. We changed that so that then people could actually have something else, which was just called Defense Aura. And basically, it's an aura that generates this special energy from the radiation that's inside of their bodies, and actually grants them a resistance or an immunity to another element. But the only downside to the power is, other than a time limit that it has, is you don't have an immunity to Animite, because we wanted it that no beings could have an immunity to it, except from the beings that don't have it to make them have the powers. But even so, it still would be insane, because it's like with Monstralisk, just the fact that he could get an aura, and he could be like, yeah, I'll just have fire immunity, so like he turns this on, or energy immunity, so he just turns this thing on, and then light beams just hit him and do nothing. So you could do that. So it's the only thing that has really changed but since then is that we have done tweaks to the stats and some of the branding, as I said, with the names. But yeah, absolutely, it is that you have so many powers that you can mess around with. Even as a superhuman, you have something where it starts off this one way, but as it goes on, you get more abilities. And as you pretty much said, it's the way that you build them. You don't get abilities that don't make sense to the power. You only get abilities that are the ones that you chose. So your power never changes unless if it's the way that you wanted it to change to. And that's really what we wanted. We wanted the ability to have 100% customizability, and we've got all sorts of different ways of doing that. We actually have, in the demo version that we'll be bringing out and sending to certain YouTubers, you, Des, and Puffin will be included in that. This version will have half of the amount of the husk powers, but it will have, I believe it's a literal it is an eighth, actually. Yeah, it's an entire eighth of the power compendium. It has 8 powers, but there's 64 in total in the actual draft, like the finalized draft that we will be making.
Man.
So
how do you balance all that stuff?
Lots and lots of not sleep. Every power has its own particular weaknesses and resistances, and if they obviously don't, we always have the nigh undefeatable 2 facts of it, which is Animite, obviously, and nullification. Because if something's powers can be nullified, then it can stop them. But we just have it down to the factor of coverage. Because yeah, you can have someone who has super strength and they're ridiculously powerful and they can turn into something really big, but ultimately there will be something that they can still be hurt by, and playing into that enough times, you can figure a way to beat them. That's exactly the point. That you could have this one person who literally rolls like 5 dice to deal damage, and it could wipe out everyone in one hit. But if you have the right strategy, you and your team can figure a way to beat them. And that's one of the most important things that I wanted for this game, that you could make anyone. Like, yeah, you could make Batman, you could make Superman, you could make a giant demon that can be the size of 4 stories and literally just take on an entire army on his own. Just to throw a couple of examples out there.
Yeah, that's a weird example, but all right.
or with our unique attribute system, with the ability to add a new effect to your abilities, buffs and debuffs, or special abilities based off of the way that the original powers work, but giving yourself a couple of downsides or an extra weakness or 2, like how in the one that we did, the game that we did, coming soon, he made a unique attribute, I can't speak now, a unique attribute called vampirism, and it was literally, his character was a vampiric dragon, and it was based off of absorption and regeneration, but his weakness was whenever he was in the sunlight, he would be harmed, but if he got hit by fire or energy, he would take double damage. But if he bites anyone and uses his powers through his mouth or fangs, he does double damage and regenerates double the amount of health. And it seemed overpowered, but the final boss was Energon, who did light energy damage, and it was a sunny day when you guys were there.
Right, so if he had gone up against Energon, he still would have had a tough time.
Absolutely. So that's it. Like, you can, even if there isn't enough there in the first parts of the actual game rules, there will be the ability to make like anything, like a giant monster, any particular person, a jack of all trades, master of one, etc., or just throwing out there a particular one, maybe a bird with one eye that has the ability to shoot out lasers, but then also has the ability to lift up 10 tons and fly everyone out of there, or just another one, a monkey with random magical abilities, or seemingly magical abilities, as we do have abilities like transmutation, which allows you to turn other objects into other things. We
so
have
basically, there's not a lot of, there's like no limits to, basically the limit is your imagination. Like you can make basically any power work in this game is the goal, right?
Absolutely. And thanks to the system that we have built, the balance is entirely down to basing it off other powers. And it also does actually have a balance feature stated in it, like, if you're making something and there isn't a rule for it, speak to your DM before finishing the making of it. We actually have that written in there. Bill and I call it the omnipotence clause. It's the foolproof way of making sure that someone doesn't have an ability that's too powerful, because then we can actually turn around and say, yeah, the reason as to why they made this is because you didn't pay attention to this rule, and as a DM it was your it's your choice to make that. But fairly everything is balanced because everything has the way that you can build and make it. Like, I might be asking the perfect person for this. I'm pretty sure you have seen One Piece, haven't you?
Oh man, you want to go down this road?
So it was the One Piece conundrum of Zoro can cut the air and slice apart buildings without actually his sword hitting the physical object.
Yeah.
And it's that concept of, like, in your world, do you want it that someone with a powerful enough sword technique who is human can do that without any superpowers? Is it super realistic and no one without superpowers can do superhuman feats that aren't like visibly and researchably tangible to the real world? Or, as I said before, do you just want it where a person can just like punch a brick and it just shatters because they've got the highest strength rating, and they've mastered this one punch over 1,000 times? Do you want to go for the Baki / One Piece level of realism, or do you want to go for documentary levels of realism? Like, how do you want to go about it? It's entirely up to the narrator's choice. But yes, if you got a willingness and a flexibility, and as you said, a vast imagination, you can make anything, and the possibilities are endless. And that's what I wanted. I wanted a system like that.
I really like it. I think it also lends itself to roleplay really well, because the way... So one of the things in Pathfinder and 5th edition that I guess I've grown used to, but I like, you don't see many types of ways of doing this, is that like a magic caster, for example, gets all sorts of different spells. Like clerics have like a huge list of wildly different things, like purifying drinking water and like dealing radiant damage and healing people and creating like a weapon that just attacks for you. Like none of these are in any way really related to each other. They're just like a bunch of abilities gathered on a list, and you could just pick the ones you want. But they're not like, there's not, I mean, aside, it's divine magic, and I'm using like air quotes when I say that, but there's not really, how is it divine, Like there's no like through, I cannot think of the word, I wish I could right now, but essentially they're not relatable enough to each other to really, like if I just told you, oh, this guy can...
There's no path to find as to how these connect.
Thank you. It's like, how is purifying food and drink and also dealing radiant damage related, honestly? Like, you could try and pull up some explanation that the radiance purifies the food, but it's like, that's not how that works in world, so why would it work in the magic, right? But another example would be a wizard. A wizard could learn to levitate, to turn invisible, to do basically all these different schools of magic, right? Where with this, I like Animite Tales a bit more than these more widely variable type systems, because your options for what power sets you want are basically, the limits aren't there. It's whatever you can conceive of. But once you have that, that's your power, right? Like you don't get to do everything. You get to specialize in up to 3 powers. And I think that's perfect, honestly, because what that means is that you become very good at what you do, and that means that you have to rely on your teammates. Like we were doing a villain heist, right? Well, I needed help from the other villains. Like I wasn't going to be able to do this by myself, even though I really liked the powers that I had. But we all served like a different role. I have to be honest,
I think you could have done it by yourself.
I definitely could have gotten out of there. Like you had to end the session, but I think I could have taken Energon. I think I could have beat his ass. I probably would have gotten hurt because he was actually dealing damage to me, but like I would have not even gone out of the enlarged state before taking him out, I think.
Yeah. I think there was a level of I think there was a threshold of damage that you were going to deal to each other before eventually he went down and you could have still run.
I think I had only reached, like, I still had like 2/3 of my threshold just for the enlarging left. Like I was not even really down hit points.
That power is so good. That power is so good.
Yeah. Well, coupled with super strength and just the way that it played out, like I don't know. It played out very in my favor.
Yes, absolutely.
Much to Rorik's distress. I watched it recently and you could just see on his face, he's like, well, this is shitty. And I'm like, you're the one to talk. You're the guy who fucking... Anyway, I don't want to spoil anything. Anybody who
try not to spoil.
hasn't seen it should just watch it.
I will say, Monstralisk, your character was actually a basis for a villain that I made for a particular thing. He was a mini boss because he was an optional boss. He wasn't actually supposed to be a boss in general. If any of my players are watching this, they're going to get PTSD when I say this name. His name was Dr. Ten Kudo of Lada, which I believe in Czechoslovakian means the one who controls. And basically I built this guy and he was like this, he's an archling demon, he's an archling, so he's like quite thin, he's quite toned, and he has super strength and enlargement, but the power that I gave him on top of that was super durability. Like his body is just tougher, and he eventually like learned willpower, because in certain situations willpower can either be used just in the form of like, you know, like working against your vice or working against the things that you like, or, you know, just willpower is just a side thing, a subsidiary stat that can be used in certain situations to make sure that you don't lose control of yourself. It could be useful against telepathy or certain things like that, being charmed. But one of them is that you can actually weaponize it, like you can actually control your willpower to use it in a form of like harming people. And this guy, Dr. Ten, it's like this whole thing of like, they thought it was this big nerd, and they're like, yeah, we'll just take what we want from this guy. And one of the players like goes up and just straight up goes like, yeah, I'm gonna knock him out, and they actually broke their hand against his face.
Yes.
And later on he gets hit by this like attack, and it's like my brother went, yeah, I got him, I dealt 90 points of damage, and I went, yeah, he's still alive though. What? And it's like, my brother was just like, I grab these guys and I just start running.
Yeah, my guy, you know, had 110 or something like that, just without any buffs to him, I believe.
Yeah, it was insane. It was insane.
Yeah, well, that's cool. I'm glad that you were inspired by that build to do another playtest with someone like that. I was just gonna say though, like, this really lends itself to roleplay because you have to rely on your teammates. And you mentioned One Piece. I mention One Piece way too often on this podcast, but one of the things I like about that show is that it's not all about who's the most powerful. The whole crew is filled with people who, yeah, okay, they've got some sort of offensive capabilities, but like Tony Chopper, the reindeer, is not as strong as Luffy. He's not supposed to be. He's the doctor of the ship, right? That's his role. And he fits that role because they need someone to help heal them, right? He's sort of like the healer of the group in a sense. Well, in this game, because you don't get to have all the powers like a wizard. You get to have a few powers, but those powers get refined and better over time, right? So that's what I like, is that you're more specialized, and that also opens it up. Like, you're gonna find, let's say you're playing a heroes campaign with like 3 other heroes, you know, other players, right? So you guys are your own like team, and you're at a lower level, but there are other bigger heroes than you, right? And you're like assisting them. Maybe you're like, there's the sidekick program or some bullshit, and you're like trying to help, you know, them out, but then eventually those heroes get killed by some big villain, and now it's up to you. Like, you are gonna have to take the mantle because you were the closest to that hero that died, and so you have all the information, and you have to continue the investigation and the crime fighting in their stead, whereas other heroes are busy doing other shit, right? Similarly, if you are DMing this game, I don't know if you call it that, narrating the game. Is that how you guys?
Yeah, we call it narrating. It's based off of the old things when the old cartoons and the old hero cartoons, like the Saturday
that makes
cartoons.
sense.
It was just like, and so the Legion of Doom. And,
I like
all
that.
Stuff.
That's great.
We just called it the narrator because you do narrate things, and we call them the games master or the GM. We usually call them the GM or the narrator. For those exact reasons, because you're not a dungeon master. There's very little dungeons in our game. Although there might be something in one of our module books that might have some level of dungeon crawling in it, but not the first one we have.
Oh, I imagine dungeon crawling is never going to be divorced from this genre at all, just because that's an adventurous thing. Even in modern day, Indiana Jones lived in like relatively modern times, and he was going into ancient tombs and shit. Plus, if someone's got like a lair, a base that you need to infiltrate, that's a dungeon,
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, also talking about Tony Chopper, I would probably be getting a lot of messages from a couple of my players if I didn't mention this character. You say about being on a crew and having a character that doesn't have many offensive abilities. My friend, they made a character called Aspen Green. And Aspen had this ability of nature manipulation and biology manipulation. And they were like the team healer. And whenever they'd heal people, they could only heal a D8. But sometimes people would be like, oh, I'm bleeding out, I'm gonna die. Like, I keep bleeding. It's like, yeah, I can keep healing you, but it's only for damage, so I can only remove the damage. And it's like, I'm gonna bleed out to death, though. And eventually they started putting their levels... Because you can either choose to put your levels into buffs to increase the amount of damage or the range on certain abilities. So for healing, you can increase the amount of health and the largeness of the dice. Or you can go for the abilities instead of the buffs. And you'll get special perks and different factors and utility uses to your abilities and powers.
So like bleeding is like a condition or something that can't just be healed normally.
Yeah, it's like an injury.
That makes sense.
However... causing said injury is down to a couple of different things in the game. You can either take so much damage that it breaks a specific threshold. We kind of have vitality in the game similar to that of armor rating, but it's not to hit. If your opponent fails to dodge your attack or react against your attack, it hits them regardless because they are trying to dodge out of the way. It creates a level of integral part of the system where, say for instance, Monstrolus throws his weapon into the side of someone. If they can't, I don't know, like duck down or jump up and the roll fails, then they get hit by it. And that's sort of the punishment rather than, my armor class is higher than yours.
I remember. We were using blocking and evasion when we played. So you had the choice.
Yes.
If you to do evasion, the DC or whatever, that's harder to do. But if you succeed, you avoid the damage completely. However, if blocking is a little easier, however, you're going to take some damage because it's still hitting you in some way. Or if you have a shield, the shield will take damage or whatever.
Absolutely. And that's exactly it. Like, because of that, that's actually how injuries get done. If we have this thing called vitality, the vitality is based off of your species health as well as your roll, and you roll this amount of dice, and that number plus a quarter of your maximum health is added together to make this big threshold. If someone breaks past that threshold, it can cause an injury depending on your constitution roll, or an ailment such as like poison, corrosive acid, or even like tiredness, fatigue, even being frozen and frostbitten or burned. Like those things all have their own reasons for being there. Like they all have their own sort of scary level of like, oh my gosh, I really hope that I don't get burned, because then damage to fire will be worse. Or bleeding, like injuries, you can actually have broken arms or severed limbs or extremities and stuff like that. And bleeding is a common one. But you can choose to either bypass that by specifically going like, okay, I grab his arm and I just like snap it. And therefore at that point you're then having to roll a grapple and then just break, instead of roll, grab, punch, and you're just hitting to deal damage and hoping for an injury. That's why there's a level of strategy for it. But Aspen, on the other hand, at the time was choosing only abilities, not buffs. And everyone was like, okay, heal me, cool. I roll this thing, I get my power, it heals you for 8 points. I need my arm fixed. And then that later on they go, okay, I got it. Okay, I got my powers to work, and I don't heal you for any points of health. What what's the point of your powers? Your arm is entirely healed and you no longer are bleeding. Wait, what? Aspen, you've gotten really good at this thing. Eventually to the point of which they were able to make organs. Like, someone actually got really bad damage, like, dealt to them. From 10, I want to point out, their body was almost exploded by a punch from 10, and Aspen had to fix them up. And to the point of which they actually did this surgery on someone entirely, giving them back, like, their legs, because their legs got blown off and all this. And, like, all of that comes from just the abilities alone. But it's like, if they ever went, like, oh, I'm just going to heal you for some damage, the amount will either be between 1 point of health all the way to 8. But in the terms of, like, injuries and ailments, it was like, yeah, no, any time that someone had, like, a broken arm or really bad battle scars or huge damage, they were like, yeah, don't worry, Aspen fix.
Yeah,
So,
I imagine that's like a key or capstone power to regrow organs, because, like, when you think about it, you can make a lot of money growing livers and stuff and hearts and then selling them to, like, hospitals to use for transplants.
Yes.
But also, I imagine, like, people listening, like, you know, a lot of my listeners are people who just played 5th edition D&D. And
Okay.
like, you guys have to know, like, that's a very simplified, like, gameplay. Some of it can be complex. I mean, they've added enough now that there are levels of complexity, especially if you like multi-classing. Like, you can get it to work to where it feels like you're really building a house here, you know. But in a game like Animite Tales, there's a little bit more what I like to call crunchiness to it that I really enjoy. I like it not being so simplified in terms of, like, your hit points, which is more like your ability to stay conscious, I think. Like,
Yes.
it should just be like your energy, general amount of blood loss, maybe, like, just all of that stuff put together is just how close you are to falling unconscious. And that, again, I was trying to say earlier, like, the role-playing aspect of this has a lot of potential, because you can't do everything. Like, you can only do certain things, and you have to rely on your buddies. And there's also, because it's this big-ass city, I forgot what the city was called, but it's like, it's huge. It's a metropolis, right? There's all sorts of heroes and villains and stuff doing their own things. You never know who's gonna Deus Ex Machina in and help you out, right? Or like obstruct you, which is something I was gonna say. Narrators out there, if you ever finding trouble balancing this type of system, it's so easy to just have, like, an elite guard or something, or elite whatever with an animite gun. You know, which I imagine are rare just because of how powerful they are, and they're, like, really expensive to get. So, like, most people would not have them.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, it would be difficult to get something like that. Yeah,
but, like, the moment someone has one, that guy who's got 3 powers, who thinks he's all that, and his name is Monstrous, is like, oh shit, and then he's got to, like, hide because he's gonna take triple the damage on that, which is a lot, even if it doesn't even deal that much, like a D8. You know, whatever it rolls times 3 is still gonna be a lot of damage. You know. You can't block it either. It's like that's like your kryptonite. So
yes,
there are a lot of ways, and it also means that if you're a human who uses, like, Batman type stuff, technology or martial arts or whatever, no amount of animite, you know, there or not there, is going to affect you. You will always have your powers. You are probably you're not the least ridiculous, or I'm sorry, you're not the most ridiculous, but you're also the most reliable. And there's that trade-off, and that's what I don't know. I feel like that role-playing potential is there, because it's not like everybody has to be even. Not everyone's going to be even, but you can have a role that's all your own, and I think that's really important.
I'm glad that you, Rorik, and Coming Soon enjoyed the session, that one shot, because it made me realize that there are different ways that you can play it and try and figure out different ways to break the game, build the game up in a particular way, or, you know, however you do. And I remember Item Pouch saying this, and I know that he won't always admit to this, but he did say, and I quote, "I am going to figure a way to break your game and ruin all of these guys' days." That's a more censored version of it, but I will never forget that he said that.
That's very like him.
And I love it, because Rorik is brilliant at doing that, because then I realised, like, oh no, what if the game isn't balanced? And I realised, actually, that's kind of the point. The game isn't supposed to have a system where, oh, super strength is so overpowered because that you could just do this and keep rolling strength and you're so ridiculous. Yes, but there's only so much that super strength can do. Again, Aspen, they could do all the stuff to heal people, and they had nature, and they could control plants and talk to animals. But at the end of the day, everyone, as you said, everyone has their wheelhouse that they need to kind of stick into. They're really good at what they do, but it's kind of similar to that in D&D with classes. I mean, paladins are so overpowered because they have this, that, and the other. Well, I mean, if I just went with a ranger and just went all range-based abilities and just went to 20 level, I would be really good with all of these quick and quirky abilities with just staying away and just completely demolishing people with only just ranged abilities. Why is it demolishing? Is it because of the damage output? No, it's because that if you have a better range capability than anyone else, you can just use that as the strategy. And that's exactly the same point as Animite Tales. Each power is almost like a class on its own because there's different ways that you can use it. And that's one of the things that I liked about it, is that you can have that factor of in this world, how rare is that ability? In some of the different stories I've done, I've made it that certain powers are rare. So if you suddenly end up with it, very little people are going to have it. Mostly just to make it interesting, because obviously if you have a DM who wants to, we actually have this new term called weakness grinding. Hashtag weakness grinding, which is finding out what all of your party members do, and then the DM just comes up with enemies that have either an ability that it makes them resistant, not weak to, or completely immune to the party's members. Like, for instance, I don't know, let's say you have Monstralisk, whose only thing is physical weaponry, and we just have it that there's a creature made out of slime, but it's completely immune to physical damage because you cut it and you slice it and it just reforms, and there's nothing this guy can do. But then someone who has energy damage, and then they've just got a guy who's covered in mirrors or is made of this mirror-like substance that just keeps bouncing off of them. Something like that. It was it's fine every now and again, but when you have a narrator who just keeps finding those weaknesses, it becomes kind of similar to paracreeping, except from the opposite way around. Not quite unlike I guess One Piece, actually.
Yeah.
It'd be kind of like if everyone had a Luffy's weakness, but then obviously you get Eneru, and honestly, that's probably my favorite pair up ever. Eneru is one of my favorite.
I was just watching a reaction to that yesterday. I've been watching a lot of One Piece reaction videos.
They are
just
good.
to relive some of those moments. Yeah, man, I really believe in this system in terms of superhero stuff, because I was talking with Puffin, I think a week or so ago from the recording of this episode, and he was talking about there really isn't a superhero RPG system that works, there's a lot of them, but they have a lot of flaws. They're not very fun to play, or maybe they are, but for one shots or something like that. And I believe Animite Tales could be the system that works based on how you guys have set it up and how customizable it can be, but also how balanced you're trying to make sure that it is. And I think if you're trying to, I guess, market it, I'm using air quotes again, market it in a sense, advertise it this is a system that is not D&D, but this is better, more suited for this type of world, when I think of for example, when I think of superhero universes, I think of stuff what is it called? Venture Brothers. You ever watch that show?
I believe I have. Or names almost always escape me, which is the worst part.
No worries. Venture Brothers is this show that was on Adult Swim. I think it's still kind of on Adult Swim. There are 7 seasons in. And it's loosely based off of the Johnny Quest type cartoons where they go on adventures, but they're still fighting guys in masks and evil geniuses and scientists and stuff like that. But the world has expanded to include superheroes. It's not just, people can be villains and wear masks and do all this stuff, and they can have resources that give them all these gadgets and henchmen and things like that. But there's also people who have real literal powers, so it's not all even. And there's all these organizations vying for control, OSI, which is the Office of Secret Intelligence, or the Guild of Calamitous Intent, which is the bad guy guild. And then there's offshoots of that who aren't aligned with the guild called the Revenge Society and other stuff. It's very interesting because all these characters, the show's not necessarily about the fights as it is about the interactions between the characters. and the main characters, the Venture brothers, are like the two weakest. They're just kids. They're like 16 to 18 years old over the course of the show, and they're just like kind of thrown into this world, and so you kind of see it through their perspective, like all these things happening. But worlds like that inspire me, and I'm like, man, I wish I could play in a world like that. And Animite Tales could be that world. Like, with all the stuff that you could do, you could make a world like that setting work with this system. Or like Teen Titans, for example. You can make a world like that work with this system too. Again, like Teen Titans is perfect because it's a group of like 5 people working together in their own little home base. Like that's an adventure. That's classic RPG adventure right there.
They do have moments where sometimes their things and plans just don't always go according to according to plan. Like
they
kind of
lose
like
all
if
the
they
time.
roll a natural one and something doesn't work the way that they were hoping or something, you know.
Right. Like with I often think of like the Mad Mod episode. Actually, have you seen that?
Mad Mod.
He's a British dude who's like obsessed with like 1960s like UK culture or whatever, and he's trying to turn wherever their city is. I don't actually know where they're located, but he's trying to turn that city or their base or whatever into basically a Beatles album cover or something like that.
Is this Teen Titans?
Yes, Teen Titans.
Yes, I do remember that now. I was like, Mad Mod, why does that sound so damn familiar?
And they're always like at his mercy. Every time he does a thing, they're like, they have to go through his like a little thing until they can figure out a way to subvert his deal. And his whole deal is like he uses technology. He's like a genius, and he can use technology to generate, you know, hallucinations.
Kind of like optic illusions.
Yes, but they're like real.
Like
like they interact with you. It's like this. While you're inside the system, it's like a virtual reality thing.
Mysterio level sort of type stuff.
Yeah, kind of like that. And like he's a great villain, and you could probably, I don't know if there's a power set for it, but you could probably make easily enough a power set for this villain to fight your hero. So you could have, maybe he's not Mad Mod. Maybe
would you like a power spoiler? Because I mean,
he's Crazy Casey, you know, and he's the opposite. He's like this Southern guy, Crazy Casey. He's trying to turn everything Southern, American South or something. I don't know. Like it could be anything you want.
Sevenfold cover right now. We actually do have a couple of those because we have telepathy with illusion creation, and we also have like at the funnel end of all of the superhuman powers at least. Well, technically we also have them for the husk powers as well, but at the end of them we have what's called evolution and mutation, and a mutation and an evolution are somewhat different in the ways that like the power ends in this particular final blowout ability where it's like either it changes the power indefinitely, like for instance how you could have with pyrokinesis the ability to manipulate and generate fire, the ability of like this one thing called it's called Flame Dominion. You are immune from any damage that comes from fire. You control all of the fire around you, and you can perfectly match anyone when it comes to it. Or the final ability, I think it's the evolution of pyrokinesis called temperature manipulation, where you can actually control the heat of fire by either increasing it, decreasing it, or even decreasing it to the point of which you can actually freeze things. And the reason as to why that's the evolution and not the mutation is because mutations either genuinely change it or are passively always happening. Like for instance, the immunity to fire is always happening. As long as the powers aren't nullified, the user can walk through like an entire burning building like as if it's nothing, pick up something, and then just be like, okay, fire, don't do anything against me or the people that I'm holding, and then it just doesn't. Like the user is literally permanently in control of all fire as long as their powers are still active.
And probably within a specific range, like
yes, absolutely. Like it's not like all fire in the world can't harm me. But that's another thing. We do state on every power there's limitations. But with technopathy, that's a mutation of telepathy, where instead of controlling people, you can now control technology. But it does actually state the user can still control technology to then affect minds. So you could actually have it like you have a screen and you can control the software on that screen, and you know it just plays out like a video of yourself live but from your mind. but then anyone who visually sees it could then see illusions, and then you could then get them so that they can now see illusions. Like the reality around them is now completely false.
Yeah, like in the Incredibles 2, they had that hypno villain or whatever.
Hypnotist or something, I can't remember. But yes,
they were using screens to hypnotize people.
Yes. Or obviously Mysterio from
I actually
Spider-Man.
haven't seen that Spider-Man movie yet. I don't know all the ins and outs of his powers.
I won't spoil, but I will definitely say they do a very good job on the special effects, and that's all I'm going to say.
Cool. I'm looking forward to it. I have it on my list.
It's good. It's good. I quite liked it. But yes, you can do anything like that. I think that's the thing. Any of you people out there who actually wanted to believe in the ideal hero or villain, My Hero Academia does it very well. One Punch Man does it very well. Obviously, DC and Marvel do it very well. In the world of superheroes, everyone thinks that the best kind of villain is a very powerful one, or one that has an ability to always know what the opponent is saying or doing. In a campaign, you can't do that. Like in Animite Tales, as someone who is a narrator, if I just have it that like my opponent knows everything that you guys do, then there needs to be an explanation as to how he can do it. Does he have telekinesis? Does he have telepathy? Can he see everything around using like a ridiculously powerful X-ray vision on the entire city or something? Like, people always want answers because of it is in a world of logic. Whereas if anything like magic, it's like, yeah, the magic can just do stuff like scrying, or bosses, or even creatures like the aboleths. They have insane amounts of knowledge, whereas with superpowers that follow guidelines, or at least have a particular logic in the world that they live in, that's when like it becomes a lot more problematic. And again, you'd think, well, that means that a lot of bosses that I want to build are really difficult. No, you just have to have a much more well thought out storyline. And someone said to me, like, how do you have time to write that? Honestly, superpowers is kind of my thing. And as soon as someone says, like, how do you have time to write up this entire campaign and then be ready to narrate it? Well, here's the thing. I don't. I write up the characters, and then I think about why they'd be there, how they'd be there, or exactly what particular actions mean that the consequence is them either finding out or them appearing. And I'll tell you how that's really a good idea, but also a bad one. Obviously, improvising is a really niche tool that some people can use and rely on, and B, it's so much more freeing when you can go, okay, that villain saw you do that, but obviously everyone got a really bad perception roll, so no one knows that they've got that. Whereas as soon as you've got a storyline, my friend, he had struggled with this recently because he was trying to do sort of a Call of Cthulhu style game, and it was working really well. Even with superpowers, there are still ways that you can feel like insignificant specks. Like, my character has an ability to turn into slime, so he's immune to physical damage. I've never come up against anyone who couldn't use anything on top of physical damage. Like, for instance, electricity, because someone had like these stun batons. These things had like venomous, corrosive acid, and at one point it just rained. And my character's ability is he's weak to rain, so he just turns into sludge. So it's like, help me, pick me up.
You need to carry a bucket with you at all times, just in case.
Yeah, exactly. But he wrote everything down, and he's now said, like, you guys took different paths that I didn't think you were going through, so I need a couple of weeks to rejig it and remodify it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but as someone who really enjoyed that campaign, that's kind of a bit of a difficult situation to be put in for your story. So improvising is really, really good, but having that notion of coming up with more the characters and the general location and the final end game content, and then just thinking, what would they do in this situation? Why would they be here? Or even, would they even be here?
And challenge their conceptions of what's possible with like villains who have more resources than them. Like, for example, you said that there isn't a way, like a power that can make you immune to Animite anymore, which I think is sensible. You shouldn't just be able to do that. I think that was a good move. However, What if there was a villain who invested all this money, stole this technology, and made essentially a personal shielding like thing? It's like this thing on his chest, and it generates a shield that just eliminates all Animite damage on top of their other powers. Like, okay, well, that's dangerous and needs to not be around, right? So like now, like I just invented that, and there's not really a rule system for that, but you can, as a narrator, make that as an item and give it to an already constructed villain with all of his other villain allies and his massive amounts of like henchmen or whatever. Like that, there you go. That's already, there's a reason to go after this guy because he's not easy to take down, and maybe he's got some other ulterior plans. Or you could do stuff like what they're doing in One Piece. This is a bit of a spoiler in case anybody's watching One Piece right now and doesn't want it. You can skip ahead. I don't know. I might put a time on screen. I might not. If I remember to, I will. But essentially, there is a character called Blackbeard, based on the real man Blackbeard from like history, and he
good old
is
Edward Teach. Or he's known as Marshall D. Teach in this one.
Marshall D. Teach, and he was able to. And there's a rule in One Piece, I guess I should clarify, that these devil fruit powers, like the power that Luffy has that makes him rubber, okay, they come from these rare fruits. You take a bite, you get the power, but you lose your ability to swim and you become weak to the ocean, okay, in a world full of oceans. So it's sort of like there's your kryptonite, your catch-22, right?
Yeah.
Well, you're only allowed to have one. Anyone who tries to eat a second devil fruit dies. Because the idea is that the two devils inside them fight for supremacy, and it kills them. Well, there is a character named Blackbeard who, for the first time in literally the history of the world of One Piece, was able to take another dead man's devil fruit power. And so he had two powers, and he used them both at the same time in front of the whole world. And he declared, "This is my era." Like, very villainous, right? You could have something like that in Animite Tales. Normally, you're only supposed to have up to 3, but what if you had more, right? And in fact, Rourke's character, I think, was able to do something similar to that. But like, you could have it where you have some story thing, some mechanic that you invent, where that is the premise, is that they're stealing powers, and now you, the heroes, have to figure out a way to take them down. And maybe that means going on a journey. Maybe the world's bigger than just the city. Maybe you have to like go to a different continent. Maybe you have to
it's bigger than yourself.
Right. Maybe you have to find their secret base on a volcanic island, like James Bond style, and like sneak inside. Like, who knows? There's so many things you can do with this. And
I love it already.
Yeah, and I'm excited just because I love that theme, and I never get to play that in D&D. And your game, your system allowed me to kind of live that out with that villain heist. Like, that felt great.
I'm glad that you enjoy it, but I will say my brother did make a character recently called Nathan Globe, who is currently doing a part of the campaign, and it's actually sort of similar to that of One Piece. It's called the 8 Seas, and in the 8 Seas journey, it's like 10 years after one of their other campaigns, and they're all sort of becoming pirates only because that they were all wanted people. They were about to be like taken onto like this prison and basically forgotten. But someone breaks them out, helps them to escape, and then once they're on, it's like, yep, you're now going to have to be pirates, but we don't want to be. Yeah, but the government is going to want your heads, and now you can't live a normal life. You'll have to be pirates. Get strong together, promise each other to help each other make each other's goals, and that's how it is. So the entire story is based on the characters' promises to each other to be able to be like, okay, what did you want to do? Bring down superhero society and make, the world more equal. Is that anarchic? Maybe it is, or something. But my brother made a character called Nathan Globe, who has the ability to, upon killing, absorb the powers of other superhumans. And because of this ability, like this unique attribute, he keeps storing these powers up in his body. He can keep taking the dead's powers. And if a person is willing to give away their powers, he can also take them that way. But they're gone forever, because in the set mechanics in the story, there's no power in the entirety of the game that will allow you to take a conscious and living person's power. So it has to be, you have to take a dead one or a willing one. However, this guy is breaking a lot of particular rules of what people conceive as physical reality. and because he has all these powers, I think he has like now like a 7 or no, it's 11 now. Yeah, I forgot how many powers he has. He has like 11 powers, including his own 2, and he now has his modifier, his Animite modifier or Animite multiplier, is now increased for each power that he took. And now he's up to 11 times Animite. If someone hits him with a single hit with an Animite gun, even if it does 1 point of damage, that's so much damage. Just it's 11 points now. But that's crazy. That's why we built it.
Yeah, even if let's say the gun is like this little pea shooter and it does 3 damage. What's 3 times 11? That's 33 fucking damage. That's insane.
And I tell you what, though, it hasn't stopped him. He keeps going, but he'll only take powers that he thinks that he needs the most. But that's exactly why we've done it with Animite Tales. For every upside, for every ability, there's a downside. For instance, like the armor. The amount of time it would take you to get that armor to be able to have resistance. Like, fair enough, if a villain has it, it's fine, because, like, you know, if they're the end goal.
Story elements, yeah.
But, like, for you to get it, it's like, oh, you have to make sure you don't damage it, otherwise, do you know how to fix this thing that could work in your favor?
Right, the genius that built it died 5 years ago, and all his work burned in his laboratory, so we don't know how to fix it anymore.
And so I mean, there are many possibilities. You can build it so that then people have resistance to it, similar to like Superman had his special spacesuit that gave him the ability to be resistant or immune to kryptonite as long as he was in the suit. If the suit broke, he was still so it's ultimately, if someone breaks the suit, they can then make it that the Animite damage is still there. So it's, you know, it's that whole thing of like, you know, I'm not taking fire damage if this shield or this car that I'm sitting is taking it, but as soon as it melts through and starts hurting me, well, I'm going to start feeling the burn then. And it's exactly that, yeah, like, you could figure out workarounds. And that's again, this is another thing that I find myself talking about. That's another thing that I love about it. People still, even after a year of playing that game, people are still talking about how they would have done it differently, how they would have built their character, if their character was still alive or still going on, or if they were still playing it, like what other things. Like, for instance, Monstrous, I'm guessing eventually would just coat himself from head to toe in like this big metal band looking like power armor, and just like walk around in it. As soon as like he like broke out, like someone started harming him or damaging the armor, he'd get out, enlarge it, and then it's just this giant monster, you know, roaming the entire city.
Right.
It's exactly that, like the incredible amount of things that you can do with it, the possibilities. But the things that revitalize me on this system every single day is the amount of people that talk to me about it, enjoy it, or even just message me about it. Helping me at the moment are my playtesters. If you're on the Patreon, when you start on the Patreon, there's a couple of tiers. On the top tier, we call this the deity tier, because you get to tell us on Discord what you want a character to look like, and as long as they are obviously sensible enough, like, you know, as long as they're not full of profanities or too rude or offensive, then we'll take that character and put it in. And so far, no one has actually had that problem anyway, but, you know, we always have to say that in case, because some people like to do some stuff. And coming soon then draws it, makes it, and then that character is put in the game as an NPC. We even stat them out based on how people want their characters to be. We base it off of a story that they tell us.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And those deity tiers and playtester members get to actually be on the Discord, and we do actually have campaigns that go on at the moment. We have a load of different campaigns that we just run. We do, I mean, at the moment, since I'm not currently at my job at the moment because of the lockdown, I do Tuesday sessions, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday sessions. So
that is a lot.
That is a lot, and two out of those 4 are the ones that I do. My brother does Tuesdays, and my friend Alpha, he does Fridays. We're currently now starting a zombie apocalypse now, where we have one perk of the superpowers, and no matter how that power works, we have to speak to him about, like, oh, this is what the power says, and he goes, cool, that's how it only works in this one way. And it's kind of like quirks from My Hero Academia. Like, your ability is like, oh, it comes from fire mimicry, I can turn into fire. Cool, yeah, roll the dice to see what perk you end up with, and it's like my brother got Feel the Burn, which is basically, since your body can turn into fire, you can just turn into fire and remove poisons and all of these like horrible inner toxins and enzymes in your body. But my brother only got that Feel the Burn ability, so he literally can just do this thing where his body temperature rises just to enough so that he can remove poisons or negate the feelings of alcohol, because he could just burn the alcohol in his body and just be fine. But that's all he's got. That's his only quirk.
Wow, that's interesting. That's like extreme fever or something, you know?
Yes. That's what I mean. Like, that's what we do. But yeah, if anyone ever interested in that sort of thing, we have our Discord that people can listen in on. And we even do podcasts that we post on our YouTube, and obviously we post them on our Patreon. But we also post on our Patreon comics. So at the moment, we've just now finished our comic explaining the Super Society, a story that is going to be sort of the backstory for our first module book. But now, in a couple of months' time, we'll be starting our work on, again, thanks to Coming Soon, our work on mini-stories, like little mini-funny things that have happened in one-shots and things like that. I might actually do the Monstralisk Zane thing if I can get the salt away from everyone's feelings on that specific situation. That, again, I'm not going to say.
I think it's been a long enough time that Rourke is fine. I don't even think he was that upset. I think he was just kind of like, I remember he's like, I don't really understand the system, so whatever. It is like he was able to do one of his things, so I think that was fine enough for him.
I do love Rourke. He's brilliant with that though. Like, he makes some horrifyingly like terrifying things, and it worked. It definitely worked. I will say that it worked. It just, let's just say it worked to the effect that he was hoping, but not the stretch goal. If
stretch goal, yeah, that's a good. I like that. It's like what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. That's kind of what it felt like, and in this case, the immovable object won. But yeah, with that note. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Joe. I really appreciated it.
No, honestly, thank you very much, man.
And everybody, like he said, he already just plugged a bunch of his shit, so you should already be checking that out before we even finish this thing. But if you're not, please check him out on YouTube, the Betarians, like almost like Beta and then Barbarian, and you take the end of Barbarian and Beta, you put together, you get Betarians. So find the Betarians on YouTube. I'll have a link in the description. You can also follow them on Twitter and go support them on Patreon so that you can keep up to date with their Animite Tales pledges and stuff, man. I am excited to see where you guys go with this, and I really believe in your system, and I hope that you guys see success with it.
Well, thank you. No, I'm hoping that you can you can get to see it soon. Like the demo, I'll post out to you guys. And again, if I can get any other praying eyes who would like a PDF, like a free PDF, because I've got what I promised Red Dice Diaries a year ago that I'd send one to him, because he does a lot of reviews on it and stuff. But yeah, I'll definitely send you over a copy, and Desert Buffalo Forest. But if I can get a hold of Dingo and Aiden, I'd also like to send them a copy as well. But yes, at the moment we're currently known as @Animite Tales on Twitter, and yeah, other than that, that's pretty much me done for plug-in. But again, thank you very much for having me on.
Not a problem. Thanks for being on, man.